You're in the shower and suddenly you're in the middle of an argument. Not a real one, one that happened 3 years ago or one that hasn't happened yet. You're saying all the right things. You're calm, articulate, devastating. You say exactly what you should have said. And for a moment, it feels like it's actually happening. Then the water goes cold. And you're back. Here's the strange part. You already knew it wasn't real. You knew the whole time. But your heart was still racing, your chest was still tight. The emotion was completely genuine, even though the scenario never existed. If that sounds familiar, you're not losing your mind. You're not broken, dramatic, or too in your head. You're doing something the human brain has been doing for thousands of years. And once you understand why, you'll never look at your own imagination the same way again. There's a version of you living inside your skull that never stops rehearsing, never stops preparing, never stops running through conversations, confrontations, confessions, all of them fictional, none of them useless. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when it does this. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. You are not strange for imagining things that never happened. You are human. And the mind you carry is one of the most sophisticated survival instruments ever created. The first type of imagined scenario almost everyone recognizes is the argument you finally win. Someone dismissed you. Someone made you feel small, a parent, a boss, a person you loved, and later, in the quiet, your brain opened a second window. In that window, you said everything. Clearly, powerfully, without stuttering. The other person finally understood. Or they didn't and you walked away with your dignity intact. Psychologists call this kind of mental replay a form of retroactive coping. When a real moment strips us of control, the imagination restores it. Not because we're dwelling, not because we're bitter, but because the nervous system needed to complete something it couldn't finish in real time. Think of it like a song that cuts off before the final note. The brain keeps searching for the resolution. The imagined argument is that resolution. It's your nervous system finally exhaling. You've probably seen this in people who seem to rehearse conflict constantly, not because they love drama, but because they grew up in environments where speaking up was unsafe, where saying the wrong thing had real consequences. The imagination became the only place they were allowed to be honest. The second type is the future fantasy, the version of your life where it all works out. The speech you give, the moment you're finally recognized, the scene where you walk into a room and everything is different because you made it through. These aren't delusions. There's something closer to mental simulations. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine. It is always modeling what comes next, running probability estimates based on everything you've experienced, everything you fear, everything you want. When you imagine the successful version of your future, your brain is rehearsing emotional states, preparing the nervous system for outcomes it hasn't encountered yet. Athletes call it visualization, but you don't have to be an athlete to do it. You just have to be someone with an uncertain future, which is everyone. But here's the part nobody tells you. Not all imagined scenarios are about hope. Some of them are about bracing for the worst. The third type, the catastrophic simulation, is where you imagine the conversation that ends a relationship, the diagnosis, the phone call you hope never comes. You replay the worst version of the future not because you want it, but because your brain has decided that being surprised by pain is more dangerous than being prepared for it. This is anticipatory anxiety dressed in storytelling clothes, and it's exhausting. Because no matter how many times you rehearse the worst case, the real thing, if it comes, still arrives on its own terms. And yet the brain keeps trying. It keeps building the scenario again and again, like a mother who packs every possible thing before a trip, just in case, just in case, just in case. There is something deeply loving about this, even when it hurts. Then there are the romantic simulations, the conversation where someone finally says it, the reunion, the apology that changes everything, the version of a relationship where it goes the way it was supposed to go. These scenarios live in the same emotional territory as grief, because most romantic imagination isn't about fantasy, it's about loss, about things that were close enough to almost happen. The brain returns to these not out of obsession, but out of an incomplete emotional experience that never got to finish itself. And there is the other kind, the revenge imagination. The quiet, private version where you imagine justice, where things are finally fair, where the person who humiliated you understands one day what they did. These imaginations are rarely about cruelty. They're about dignity. They're the mind's way of insisting what happened to me mattered. I mattered. All of these scenarios, the arguments, the triumphs, the disasters, the romances, the quiet revenges, they share something at their core. Control. Underneath every imagined scenario is a person who wanted to feel, even briefly, that they had some say in what happened, that the world was legible, that they weren't entirely at the mercy of other people's choices and random chance. And underneath that desire for control is something softer, lonelier, the need to be understood. So many imagined conversations are really just the same conversation, repeated in different forms. The one where someone finally sees you. Not the version of you that performs and apologizes and explains the actual you. And in the imagination, they get it. They really get it. That's not pathology, that's longing. And longing is one of the most human things there is. But the imagination has a shadow side, and it would be dishonest not to name it. When the simulations start running on a loop, when the imagined confrontation replays 40 times and still doesn't feel resolved, when the fantasy version of your life starts feeling more real and more comfortable than the actual one, that's when the imagination stops being a tool and starts becoming a home you can't leave. The mind can become so fluent in fictional experience that real interactions start to feel blunt by comparison. Too uncontrollable, too unpredictable, too full of moments where you don't get to say the perfect thing, and slowly, without noticing, you begin to prefer the version inside your head. This is not a moral failure. It's what happens when the inner world becomes the only place that feels safe. When reality has been too many times the place where you lost. The imagination works differently at different points in your life. At 20, you imagine the future with urgency. You're rehearsing who you're becoming. At 35, the simulations shift. You replay the past more. You try to understand what happened and why. At 50, something quieter arrives. The imagination becomes less about winning and more about meaning. The scenarios are fewer but heavier. The behavior doesn't disappear. It evolves. It changes shape to fit the questions you're currently carrying. Which means this isn't something you do because something is wrong with you. It's something you do because you're alive and conscious and trying to make sense of a world that very rarely explains itself clearly. Ultimately, the imagined scenario is a blanket. Not a cure, not a solution, a blanket. It wraps around the part of you that couldn't speak in the moment, that felt too much or not enough, that walked out of a conversation and spent 3 days thinking about everything it wanted to say. The imagination covers that part. It says, here. Here is the version where it went the way it should have. Here is the version where you were ready. Here is the version where you were enough. It doesn't fix anything, but it holds something. So if you are someone whose mind never really stops, who lives in two places at once, the real world and the rehearsed one, this isn't something to be ashamed of. It means your inner life is rich and alive. It means you feel things deeply enough to keep returning to them. It means you are someone who cares about connection, about fairness, about being seen enough to keep imagining the version of reality where those things actually happen. Your mind isn't broken. It just never learned when to stop caring. And that, quietly, is one of the most human things about you.